Hello, I'm Dan Curry with the Deeds of God website, and today I wanted to give you an account of a miracle that happened prior to 301 AD, which caused the nation of Armenia to become the world's first officially Christian nation. The area of Armenia is kind of interesting. Yes, it did become the world's first officially Christian nation, and Jesus is sometimes likened symbologically to the Ark of Noah, in that he preserves those who take refuge in him, and you entered it through the side and exit it through the side. All creation is saved through Christ. And you know, the location of Armenia, it's very near to Mount Ararat, the mountains of Ararat, or R2. And you know, it's kind of interesting that that ark may be close to Armenia. You know, Noah's Ark may be found close to Armenia, and the first Christian nation was close to the mountains of Ararat, and you know, it is Armenia. Kind of an interesting parallel there. But to move on, the way that Armenia became the first Christian nation is a strange story. It's quite worth hearing, I think. It began with you know, Armenia being a battleground of sorts between the Parthian Empire and the Roman Empire in the 3rd century AD, you know, the 200s. And there was a king, Chosroes I, who was a king that was sort of a vessel of Rome. You know, Rome backed him, and he sort of sided with Rome against the Parthians, who were the Eastern Empire that Rome butted heads with quite often. And only the Parthian Empire was really ever strong enough to butt heads with Rome. They were almost equals for a lot of centuries. But King Chosroes I, he was the king of Armenia, and the Parthians decided to do a little intriguing, you know, and they paid a man named Anik, an Armenian man named Anik, to try to assassinate King Chosroes. And this man Anik was able to get close enough that he was able to assassinate his Armenian king. So the king was dead, and Anik tried to escape, but he was eventually caught before he was able to find a place to hide, and he was executed. So the country was in a little bit of turmoil, and nobody knew how big the plot was. Like any time a ruler's killed, you know, there's questions of how many people are in on this. Is it an isolated incident? So both men had family, both men had children, and so the son of Chosroes I was whisked off to Rome. His name was Tiridates III. He ended up being Tiridates III. So he was whisked off to Rome for safety. And Anik had a son too, even though Anik was just a, you know, a plain man, an ordinary man, but he did have family. And of course they were worried that what their father, their husband had done would, you know, reflect back on them, that they might become enemies of the state. So they took refuge in what we might call Israel today. And they actually some of them took refuge in a city called Caesarea on the coast of Israel. And this one person, this one son of Anik named Gregory, he was raised and educated there in Caesarea, and he, you know, achieved a pretty high level of education. And he was a little bit ashamed of what his father had done, because he saw himself as an Armenian, and he knew his family had to flee Armenia because of what his father had done, and he wanted to kind of make it up. He wanted to kind of restore the family name. Meanwhile, Tiridates III was taken to Rome and raised among royal Roman sons. You know, so his classmates, so to speak, his acquaintances, were some of the people who had become the great men of Rome in his generation. And Rome thought they had quite a thing in Tiridates III, a good pawn, if you will, because he was from Armenia and he was a royal. He would be acceptable to Armenians as their king. Yet he sided heavily with Rome against Parthia because his father had been killed by Parthians. And so they realized that someday they would be able to put Tiridates III in charge of Armenia and have a king they could rely on that would probably be loyal to them. So he was a valued piece in Rome, you know, a valued asset in Rome, and he was raised there and taught how to rule and various other things. So as time went by, it got to be 270 AD, and the Emperor Aurelian decided to go to Armenia with soldiers, with forces, and he fought the Parthians there, and he won a great battle. He didn't quite run the Parthians all the way out of Armenia, but you know, they were definitely back on their heels. And it was a great time to put Tiridates III into power. So soon he was brought to Armenia and placed as the king there. And he was accepted by the Armenian people, most of whom were Roman-leaning apparently. And so as he became the ruler, he built himself an army and he began to fight the Parthians on his own. 17 years went by, and as he matured as a king and a leader of the military, etc., he drove the Parthians clear out of Armenia during those 17 years, or effectively so. And so he became kind of the undisputed ruler. At the same time, Gregory had decided to join the Armenian army. He had to keep his head kind of low. He didn't want everybody to know whose son he was, but he wanted to fight for Armenia. So he went in as a secretary of the army, just various secretarial duties. Well, a problem arose. One time, military people will sometimes sacrifice to a god or a goddess prior to an engagement, for good luck and everything. And in Armenia, they had a goddess named Anahit, and it was basically like Aphrodite or Artemis. It was their version of that goddess. But one time there was a ceremony, and a lot of the military people were there, and Tiridates III was there, and they were going to sacrifice to Anahit for good luck, and Gregory was there. He happened to be there, probably a little awkward. He knows who Tiridates III is, the son of the man his dad killed. And Tiridates didn't know who he was, and he was, in Tiridates' army, probably a little bit of a nervous time. But of all things, of all the bad luck, Tiridates III at one point in the ceremony pointed at Gregory and said, "Go place this flower wreath at the foot of the goddess Anahit." Well, I didn't mention it, but Gregory had become a devout Christian, and he wasn't going to do that. He couldn't do that. This is a false goddess. He just wasn't going to do that. So he had to decline the king's, I won't say command, but direction, and explain that he was a Christian, which did not make the king happy, to hear that he wasn't going to do what he told him to do. And so somebody who happened to know who this boy was, well, he wasn't a boy anymore, Gregory, somebody who happened to know his background and who he was, decided to pipe up right then, and he said to Tiridates, "This is the son of the man who killed your father, sire." So Tiridates determined that that was true, and he was furious. Of course, he was glad to have caught him, and he had him beaten and he had him tortured, but he decided not to kill him. He decided to send him to a sort of a prison cell called Kirvarap. Kirvarap is not that far from Mount Ararat. You can see Mount Ararat in the background pictures. It still exists today. There's tourist photos of it. So Kirvarap is Khorvirap, and it was sort of a cylindrical type prison. It was almost like a grain silo that was sunk part way into the ground, and it was about as big as an average room, I suppose, and had a dirt floor, and you couldn't crawl out of it. It was smooth cylindrical walls, and food got passed in, to the prisoner. And so for the next 13 years, Gregory was a prisoner in Kirvarap, a very cold place when it was cold, hot when it was hot, kind of open to weather, not much room for living. It was a pretty bad prison. Not a very good place to spend your time. Well, in the meantime, Tiridates III, he got to the point where he wanted a wife. He may have had one wife already, I don't know that, but he wanted another wife. Well, there were some nuns in Rome. There was a time of persecution in Rome also. There were a lot of Christians there, and it was starting to be rough with a lot of persecution against the Christians, and these nuns were fearful for their life, and they decided that for their safety, if they were going to survive, they needed to go do their work somewhere else, and they went to Armenia. Well, among these nuns, who were led by a woman named Gaian, was a woman named Hripsime, Hripsime. I'm hoping that's a good pronunciation. Hripsime was gorgeous, apparently just unutterably gorgeous, a woman among women. So one of the king's men, when these nuns came to the area, recommended her to him and said, she's very beautiful. So he invited them to his palace under the pretext of offering them a dinner and getting to know them so he could see this woman. And when they showed up, she was everything he had heard. So during the evening of entertainment, he broached to her that he found her very beautiful and that he was willing to have her as his wife. He offered a marriage to Hripsime. Well, Hripsime, she declined. She said, "I'm already married to Christ. We don't have the latitude to try to be married to a man when we're married to Christ. He's our husband, so to speak, as we see it." Well, he didn't like that answer, and he tried to prevail upon the leader of these nuns, whose name was Gaian. But she said the same thing. She said, we're brides of Christ, and that's that. We don't have the ability to choose to marry a man. Excuse me. So, at any rate, he was angry, very angry, and he decided to torture and kill these women. That's what he did. He tortured them all and he killed them all. Shortly after that, he started getting a strange mental illness. He started having fits in which he started acting like a pig, a swine, a hog. He would go outside and apparently root around and make strange grunts and noises and walk around the forest, and to people's, to all appearances, to people's opinions, he appeared to be acting like a hog. And this disease progressed. And as the years went by, he was just getting worse, and people tried to cure him, but nobody knew what to do. Nobody found anything that worked. One day, his sister's name was Zoxrovidux. So anyway, one day his sister Zoxrovidux had a dream. And in her dream, she was shown that there was this man who could cure her brother, the king. And she was shown that he was in a prison, and that her brother had put him there. Well, she woke up somehow convinced that this was a special dream, and she started looking for the man. She gathered some information from her dream about him, and she thought it was too long ago, but to her surprise, she learned that this prisoner was still in Khor-Virap, over near to Mount Ararat, still a prisoner and alive. He had lived despite the harsh conditions and the lean food. They didn't give him much food, because there was a very kind woman who lived in that town. And when she would pass this prison, this tower sort of prison, all these years she had made it her habit to toss bread up and over so that it would fall down into there, so that whoever was in there would have something more to eat. And over these years, she'd fed him enough extra that he'd been able to survive. So anyway, he's still alive, and the king's sister finds him there and brings him to the king, and he prays for the king, to Jesus, and the king gets better instantly, right away. And so the king, now, in his right senses, now of sound mind, he knows that Jesus healed him, and he determines he's going to become a Christian right away. He doesn't waste any time. He repents, he becomes a Christian, and he decides, my land will become a Christian land. So he tells the people, some of the people rebel against the idea. They're worshiping the old false gods. But he takes his army and opposes the areas of his nation who are trying to buck his will on this matter. And eventually, all of Armenia becomes Christian. It's the first official Christian nation in the world. 301 AD it became Christian. And he made Gregory, the son of his father's killer, the bishop of all Armenia, the head of the church there. And as for where the church was first built, the first church, the first large cathedral in Armenia, Gregory had a dream, and he saw these brilliantly lit angels, and Jesus too, in the dream, and Jesus had a golden hammer in his hand. And Gregory recognized the scenery, the setting. It was a country setting. Jesus took that golden hammer and he hit the ground, and Gregory understood that's where the church needs to be built. Well, he knew the place. He recognized the place. So the first church was built there, and the king, of course, provided the money. And Grigor Luisavorich, Grigor Luisavorich is the way they say the name of this Gregory. He was their first king, and they named this church that was built the Mother Cathedral of the entire Armenian Church. That's its official name, Mother Cathedral of the entire Armenian Church. And it's still there today. It's been rebuilt upon a little bit. There's still some remaining of the initial part, though. And so it is the oldest known existing Christian cathedral. So the first Christian nation has the oldest known still existing Christian cathedral. And this is the kind of amazing story of how an assassin's son and a king's son came to be friends under Christ and made Armenia the first Christian nation. Pretty amazing. Well, my name is Dan Curry from the Deeds of God website. I hope you'll go and enjoy this and over 100 other true stories from Christian history. And thank you for listening.